first decades of our common era, when Jesus was a young lad, is quoted as saying, "What is hateful to you, don't do to your neighbour. That is the whole law, while the rest is a commentary on it. You go now and learn it." And Rabbi Akiba, in the early 2nd century, called Leviticus chapter 19 verse 18 the great summary of the whole law. Well, just to conclude now with 2 small comments about this section. Paul's focus in these 2 chapters of exhortation is our love for others. Hence, he's not speaking of love of God, but only of love of neighbour. A second comment, when he says that love fulfills the whole law, we've got to remind ourselves that it's really the gift of the Holy Spirit poured out into our hearts, who enables us to fulfill the law by loving. Because it's our loving our neighbour that fulfills the law. Loving is the fundamental principle of all moral behaviour. Not obedience, but love. Now we move to our 3rd section, living in the end times, verses 11 to 14. Paul began his exhortation in chapter 12 with some guiding principles. You might remember in verses 1 and 2, one of these principles was, don't model yourselves on the world around you, because the world as we see it is going to pass away. It's in the process of passing away. So our passage now, which forms the end really of the great exhortation section, forms an inclusion, if you like, with those very first ideas. Both are about not being conformed to the world, and the end times are here, approaching quickly upon us. An event which began really with the Lord's resurrection. An event which is the great Kairos moment of history. It was very common in the early church to appeal to the coming of these end times as a motive for living in a particular way, more wholeheartedly, more faithfully, as Jesus wishes us to live. In Hebrews chapter 10, for example, we read, "Don't stay away from the meetings of the community as some people do, but encourage each other to go. The more so as you see that the day is near at hand." In 1 Peter chapter 4, "Everything will soon come to an end, so pray better. Keep a sober mind, and above all, never let your love for each other grow insincere." Mark chapter 13 speaks of the importance of keeping vigil. Stay vigilant, stay awake, and uses the image of a man travelling abroad who leaves the doorkeeper in charge of locking up. And the doorkeeper is instructed to stay awake because he doesn't know the hour when the master will return. And of course, it's a very common image in Paul himself. One passage in particular in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 is a real foreshadowing, if you like, of this passage. It speaks of night and day, sleeping and staying awake, or waking up rather, on putting on love as a breastplate, and so on. So many of the ideas are common to both passages. And Father Burns suggests that the heart of this passage really is most likely a formula or a hymn used at baptism. He follows Ulrich Wilkins' reconstruction of part of this hymn, and I'll just give it to you now. "It's already the hour for you to wake from sleep. The night is far spent. the day is at hand. Let us then cast off the works of darkness and put on the armour of light. Now Paul develops this by enumerating several of the works of darkness and by using the armour of light as a beautiful metaphor for putting on Christ himself. The words of darkness are, well, drunken revelry, sexual immorality, and a quarrelling which leads to violence. And of course those things, as we know, just by looking at the papers, are common things that happen at night, around the pubs and clubs and so on. The metaphor for putting on Christ is a beautiful one. It's as you wake up, you put on your workday clothes, etc., so that you can go out and face the day. So this beautiful matter of putting on Christ recalls our baptism. As Paul says in Galatians chapter 3, inasmuch as you have been baptized, you have put on Christ. And of course, as we put on Christ, we know his Spirit is within us and working through us. But, and Father Byrne adds this, it may also have behind it a sense of Greek theatre, where, and I quote him, the garment put on by actors portrays a particular character, and it was customarily so all-enveloping that they could rightly be said to have abandoned their individual identity and put on completely that of the character portrayed. Putting on Jesus, as we face a new day, is a beautiful image for all of us. And I can't help thinking of that hymn, St. Patrick's breastplate, Christ be with me, Christ within me, Christ above me, Christ behind me. We come now to our fourth section out of the 5 sections. We're moving into chapter 14 and verses 1 to 12. The flow of the exhortation section of Paul's letter has gone from some general considerations for living in community to charity towards everyone, towards duties towards the civil authorities, winding up with some words about the primacy of love and living in the end times. And now Paul changes gear a little bit, and he moves from these general exhortations and considerations to a particular problem that seems to be within the community. There are some members of the community, whom he calls the strong, who live their faith in a rather broad-minded way. They don't see any reason to refrain from eating any particular food, or they don't see that they need to observe any particular day as special. But there are other members of the community, the weak, who feel the need to refrain from eating meat or strong drink, and who are quite zealous about observing rituals on certain special days. The problem is that the strong look down on the weak and poke fun at them, belittle them in some way. Poor things, still trapped in all those unnecessary things. But the weak, their problem is that they are very judgmental of the strong. That lax, proud lot, who aren't very religious really, they're overeducated, they're too broad-minded, whatever you put it. I think we can probably see the problem. We might even know of a problem like that. I can just remember this, for example. A few decades ago, many Catholics began to focus on the love of God and paid not much attention really to the rules and regulations. Whereas, at the same time, there are a lot of others who are saying, we've got to get down to a knowledge of the 10 Commandments and focus on them. And we've got to get back to following all the rituals and laws of the church. That's an example. Today, many focus on